The air crackled with something more than fame. It was the kind of tension you sense before a storm, the kind that unsettles you, makes you lean in closer. For years, the music world watched two names hover almost untouchably above the rest: Jay-Z, the mogul, the empire builder; Beyoncé, the queen whose image seemed flawless, untouchable, serene. They were more than artists. They were icons, a dynasty in motion. But now, there was a shift happening. A voice rising from the edges of that empire. A voice calling for truth. That voice was Nicki Minaj. What nobody expected was how she would turn quiet ambition into something wild and daring. And how she threatened to expose what lay beneath the glossy surface. The first shot wasn't a headline, not yet. It was a tweet. A single message that seemed playful but felt heavy. A challenge to the throne. The world paused. Because when you question a dynasty, what you might awaken isn't just scandal, it's consequence. And that's exactly where this story begins. Let's rewind. Before the drama, before the call-out, for the shockwaves, there was a girl from Queens, hip-hop's determined daughter. Nicki Minaj, born Anika Tinyamaraj. She came less like royalty and more like urgency. She grew up surrounded by struggle and music, imagination, her refuge. She didn't inherit fame, she fought for it, scrapped for it, clawed her way into microphones and studio booths, determined to be heard. Every verse carried both bravado and vulnerability. She made hits, stadiums, fandoms, the barbs, and she watched how the industry worked. Deals, favors, alliances, empires, built on names and silence. Meanwhile, Jay-Z had built something different. From Brooklyn rooftops to boardrooms, his rise was textbook Hollywood myth. Hustler turned mogul, artist turned power broker. Beyoncé, the star beside him, she seemed the perfect partner. Flawless in public, her smile unshakable, her brand untarnished. Together, they made history. Their empire sprawling into music, fashion, streaming, culture itself. For many artists, playing in their orbit meant access, opportunity, privilege. But it also meant caution. Don't challenge, don't question, don't rock the cage. Nicki saw that. From early features to collaborations, she learned the game. She sensed the balance, the friendship, the deference, the silent nods. She also sensed something else, a ceiling. You get boosted. You get applauded. But you step outside the line. And the machinery hums with quiet exclusions. She tried. She soared. But somewhere along the journey, admiration morphed into suspicion. Suspicion that maybe the rules weren't the same for everyone. That maybe the gatekeepers kept different keys for themselves. The world saw the success. Platinum albums, sold-out shows, fashion covers. But behind the glow, she carried questions. Not about spotlight. About fairness, not about recognition, about respect, not about being loved, about being valued. And so when the moment came for her to speak, she did it loud, clear, and with fire beneath her words. Then came the main act. What had been simmering became blaze, a public confrontation that turned whispers into headlines and allies into witnesses. It began with a social media post. What seemed like an aside turned into a declaration. Nicki announced that the streaming service, TIDL, founded by Jay-Z and backed by major artists, owed her millions. She claimed she held equity, a stake, a promise made when the platform launched. She said she got a token payment while the sale of the company soared. She used the phrase karmic debt. She calculated $100 million to $200 million owed. That number roared through the internet. Hype Fresh Plus to Distractify. Plus two, it wasn't just the money. It was the principle. She said, "You still in my top 5 though? Let's get it." High Fresh. But here's the twist. This was not merely about business. It was about betrayal, about power, about being silenced. She asked the mogul to call her to settle. She declared she would use those funds to pay her fans' school loans through her charity. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. She wasn't just making noise, she was holding him accountable. And the empire watched. Then the tension widened. A post that included the name Bey, linked to Beyoncé, got edited. The fans noticed. The Beyhive reacted. The message, Nicki's rift might not stop at Jay-Z. It might touch Beyoncé's world too. In Diatimes +1, suddenly the Queen's fans were guarding the castle. While Nicki stood outside, microphone in hand, waiting to be heard. The drama deepened when another story swirled, the suggestion that Jay-Z's influence went beyond music, that he held strings, controlled access, built loyalty with fear as currency, not kindness. In interviews among fans, in court of public opinion, some pointed to the NFL halftime stage, the streaming platform deals, the exclusives that lifted some and passed over others. Nicki suggested she was one of those passed over. Distractify +1, some tried to dismiss it. Others watched carefully. Because when a star this big speaks out, the spotlight shifts. And when the target is bigger still, the echo becomes thunder. Within that, the family, the empire, the brand, all of it was at risk. In the silent rooms of power, deals whisper. In the bright lights of social media, truths scream. One post becomes a crumpled contract. One tweet becomes a legacy question. The stage wasn't just for music anymore. It was for reckoning. Nicki didn't only want what she said she'd been denied. She wanted to expose the system, introduce the spotlight into dark corners. And in doing so, she put everything on the line. Career, friendships, peace of mind. As the drama unfolded, friends and foes picked sides. Some fans rallied behind Nicki, seeing her as the underdog fighting the system. Others defended the dynasty, trusted the empire's silence meant nothing to hide. Meanwhile, the music paused. The silence from Jay-Z's camp was deafening. They knew what they faced, an accusation not easily dismissed. Nicki didn't scream insults. She posed questions. She invited reckoning. She urged transparency. She didn't just name a number. She attached purpose, education, community, fairness. When you attach that to conflict, you force reaction. And the empire that once crushed dissent now found itself under the glare. The twist here is subtle. The fight wasn't for money alone. It was for voice, for respect, for legacy. Nicki's past battles with other artists, they faded. This one tapped into something structural, the kind that shakes foundations, the kind that makes people ask, who really holds the power? Who decides who makes it? Who stays? The impact of all this changed more than headlines. It changed lives. For Nicki, the emotional cost crept in. She laid bare that sometimes being one of the greatest doesn't protect you from being undervalued. She admitted frustration, hurt, anger. She faced criticism for switching tone, for being too loud, for not playing nice. But behind that facade of confidence was a woman who trusted an industry only to find the handshake came with handcuffs. Meanwhile, Jay-Z and Beyoncé's world shifted too. The royalty of hip-hop and pop wasn't immune. The facade of perfection cracked. Fans saw behind the scenes the enormous wealth, the alliances, the silent power plays. Rumors raged. The Beyhive defended. Others speculated. The family, the brand, the empire, all vulnerable. But perhaps the most painful was the betrayal, because this is the story of someone who felt they gave their all, then found themselves facing the question, did the industry ever value me or just use me? That question echoes louder when your peers climb, your empire watches, and you're still asking for what you were promised. For her fans, Nicki is no longer just a star. She's the wounded voice asking for fairness. That vulnerability hit like lightning. The public watched as her struggles became part of her music, her message. The tides changed. Not just in her favor, but in the consciousness of the culture. This wasn't only a business row. It was personal. It was familial. It was about loyalty, identity, truth. And now we arrive at the crossroad. Where does any of this go next? Will the debt be paid? Will the silence be broken? Will the empire win by ignoring the noise? Or will a new narrative rise, one where artists hold power differently? For Nicki, the fight won't end with a check. It won't fade with a single tweet. Because she's engaged in something bigger, reclaiming her story. For Jay-Z and Beyoncé, the challenge is starker. Stability built on silences is brittle. And once the spotlight hits the corners, you can't decide what stays hidden and what comes out anymore. What we see now might just be the beginning. The empire, the throne, the queen and king of their realm, they may not have known they'd planted a single seed of dissent. But when that seed grew into voices, music, tweets, demands, it became unstoppable. Because authenticity wins hearts. Vulnerability wins ears. Truth wins legacy. So perhaps the real question isn't who's right, but who will rewrite the rules? And if Nicki's willing to speak, we be ready to hear. Because sometimes the real power isn't the fortress built on fame. It's the one built on being seen. And when the neglected find their voice, the empire trembles. Nicki Minaj, born Anika Tinyamaraj, she came less like royalty and more like urgency. She grew up surrounded by struggle and music, imagination, her refuge. She didn't inherit fame, she fought for it, scrapped for it, clawed her way into microphone.